The lobby of Henderson and Company, one of the most prestigious corporate offices in the city, gleamed under the soft glow of its crystal chandeliers. Executives in tailored suits strode confidently across the polished marble floors, their conversations crisp and purposeful. Behind the front desk, a team of receptionists greeted high-profile clients with professional smiles. Amidst this bustling environment stood David Carter, the head security guard, a tall, middle-aged black man with a calm yet authoritative presence. His uniform was always immaculate, his posture upright, and his demeanor one of quiet dignity. David had worked at the company for years, earning the respect of many employees. Though he was polite and professional, management barely acknowledged him. Ethan Reynolds, the arrogant operations manager, saw David as nothing more than a lowly worker. To Ethan, a man like David had no real importance. But he had no idea who he was truly dealing with. It was an ordinary afternoon at Henderson and Company, with employees moving about the building, engaged in their daily tasks. David Carter stood at his usual post near the entrance, scanning the crowd with his keen, watchful eyes. His job was simple: maintain security, ensure protocol was followed, and treat everyone with respect. But not everyone showed him the same courtesy. That afternoon, a sleek black sports car roared up to the building's entrance, screeching to a halt in a space clearly marked reserved no parking. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Travis Monroe, a wealthy client known for his arrogance. Dressed in an expensive designer suit, he strode toward the entrance without a second glance at the sign. David took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, sir. This area is restricted. I'll have to ask you to park in the designated lot." Travis stopped mid-step, his brow furrowing in annoyance. He turned to David with a smirk, looking him up and down as if sizing up someone beneath him. "Do you even know who I am?" he scoffed. "I do business here. I don't take orders from security." He made a move to continue, but David remained steady. "Company policy applies to everyone, sir," he said. "I'd be happy to direct you to visitor parking." The smirk on Travis's face twisted into a scowl. He was not used to being told no, especially by someone he saw as unimportant. His voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby employees. "Listen, I don't have time for this nonsense," he snapped. "Either move out of my way, or I'll make a call that will have you out of a job by the end of the day." A few employees nearby exchanged uneasy glances, sensing trouble brewing. Unfazed, David simply nodded. "Sir, I'm just following protocol. If you have an issue, you can take it up with management." He then stepped aside, signaling for another guard to assist with directing traffic. But Travis wasn't done. Furious at the perceived disrespect, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. His voice dripped with entitlement as he barked into the receiver. "Ethan, get down here. One of your security guards is getting in my way." Moments later, Ethan Reynolds stormed out of the building, his expression tight with irritation. He barely glanced at David before turning to Travis. "Mr. Monroe, I'm so sorry for this inconvenience. I assure you, this will be handled immediately." Travis crossed his arms, satisfied, as Ethan turned to David, his eyes filled with contempt. "David, we don't need security harassing our valued clients," Ethan spat. "This is unacceptable." David met Ethan's gaze, his face unreadable. "I was only enforcing company policy, sir." Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. "Company policy?" he echoed mockingly. "Let me make one thing clear. When it comes to our biggest clients, exceptions are made." Then, without hesitation, he delivered the final blow. "You're fired. Pack up your things and leave immediately." A hush fell over the onlookers. Some employees shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. David, ever composed, simply nodded. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned silence. No one, not even Ethan, realized the gravity of their mistake. David walked out of the building with the same quiet dignity he had always carried. His broad shoulders remained squared, his posture unwavering, even as the weight of injustice pressed against him. The security staff watched in stunned silence, exchanging uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. The truth was, many of them respected David. He had been a mentor, a guiding presence, a man who treated everyone, regardless of their position, with kindness. Yet, in that moment, no one spoke up for him. Inside, Ethan Reynolds returned to his office, satisfied that the situation had been handled. He had no patience for employees who disrupted the company's relationship with wealthy clients. Travis Monroe, now grinning with smug satisfaction, patted Ethan on the shoulder. "You made the right call," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Can't have guys like that thinking they can challenge people like us." Ethan nodded in agreement, not giving David another thought. Meanwhile, at the reception desk, Lisa Harper, a young administrative assistant, sat with a frown creasing her forehead. She had always admired David's work ethic and quiet wisdom. Unlike Ethan, she had seen how much David did beyond his assigned duties, helping new employees, diffusing tense situations, even assisting janitors when no one was watching. His firing didn't sit right with her. And as she glanced around at the other employees, some whispering, others avoiding the subject altogether, she realized she wasn't alone in feeling that way. Curiosity gnawed at Lisa. She opened her laptop and searched David Carter's name. At first, nothing unusual appeared, just routine employee records. But then she noticed something strange. A small, archived article from several years ago mentioned a David Carter in connection to a high-profile event. The details were vague, but the more she read, the more her heart began to race. Something about David didn't add up, something big. She hesitated, then copied the link and sent it to a colleague with a simple message. Who exactly was David Carter before he worked here? She had a feeling they were about to find out. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something about David's past had been overlooked. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she dug deeper into the search results. The more she uncovered, the more her heart pounded. She clicked on an old news article, then another, each one revealing pieces of a story that didn't match the humble security guard they had all known. Her eyes widened as she read the headline. Former military hero turns down high-ranking position to live a simple life. The article detailed the story of Colonel David Carter, a highly decorated war veteran who had once served in elite military operations. He had received multiple honors for his service, including a Medal of Valor, and had even been offered high-level government roles. But after years of service, he had chosen to step away from the spotlight, dedicating his life to community service and helping underprivileged youth. Lisa gasped, covering her mouth. David Carter wasn't just a security guard. He was a legend. She quickly shared the articles with a few trusted colleagues. Within minutes, whispers spread through the office. Employees huddled around computer screens, scanning the headlines, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were in awe, others in shame, realizing they had watched a great man be humiliated and had done nothing to stop it. As the news traveled, one of the senior executives, Margaret Lawson, received an urgent call. The CEO, who was out of town, had caught wind of the situation and was furious. "You mean to tell me," his voice thundered through the speaker, "that we fired Colonel David Carter, one of the most respected military strategists of our time, over a petty parking dispute?" The weight of his words hit Margaret like a blow. Realizing the severity of the mistake, she stormed into Ethan's office, slamming a printout of the article on his desk. "Did you even bother to look into who you just fired?" she demanded. Ethan picked up the papers, his face shifting from irritation to disbelief. This can't be right," he muttered, scanning the details. But there it was, David's face, younger but unmistakable, displayed in official military photographs, standing next to world leaders and top generals. For the first time, Ethan felt something foreign creeping into his chest, regret. He had dismissed David as just another employee, someone beneath his notice. But now, he saw the truth. David had likely accomplished more in his lifetime than Ethan ever would. The office buzzed with conversation, but Lisa wasn't done yet. She continued reading through more reports and stumbled upon yet another revelation. David had not only served his country, but had also quietly funded scholarships, built community centers, and mentored countless young people. His contributions had changed lives, and he had never once sought recognition for it. He had chosen humility over fame, service over prestige. Lisa clenched her fists, anger rising in her chest. This was the man they had fired? This was the man they had humiliated? She turned to a group of co-workers, her voice shaking with conviction. "We need to make this right." Meanwhile, outside the office, the world was catching on. News outlets began picking up the story. Social media was in an uproar, and public sentiment was turning against Henderson and Company. The company was now facing the kind of scandal that could ruin its reputation for years to come. And at the center of it all was one quiet, dignified man who had never needed power or status to command respect, David Carter. But the real question remained, would he even care to return? The next morning, Henderson and Company was in full-blown crisis mode. The revelation of David Carter's true identity had spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and sparking outrage on social media. Employees whispered in hushed tones, avoiding Ethan Reynolds, whose usual arrogance had all but disappeared. His face was pale, his movements stiff. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, Margaret Lawson, the senior executive, had taken control of the situation. She gathered the leadership team and made one thing clear. They needed to fix this, fast. "We humiliated a national hero," she stated firmly. "This company's reputation is on the line. We need to reach out to David Carter immediately and offer him his job back, with a public apology." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The thought of facing David, of admitting his wrongdoing, unsettled him. "What if he refuses?" he muttered. "After everything, he has every right to." Lisa Harper, sitting across the table, leaned forward. "Then we accept that we failed," she said bluntly. "But we still owe him an apology, whether he takes the job back or not." The room fell silent. It was clear. This wasn't just about saving the company's image anymore. It was about doing the right thing. Hours later, Margaret, Ethan, and a small team arrived at a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. They pulled up in front of a modest home. Not the kind of place one would expect for a man of David's accomplishments. Yet it fit him perfectly. No luxury, no extravagance, just peace. David was outside, tending to a small garden in his front yard when the company's representatives stepped out of their sleek, black vehicles. He didn't seem surprised to see them. In fact, he barely looked up as he continued pulling weeds, his movements steady, unbothered. Margaret was the first to step forward. "David," she began, her voice carefully measured. "I'm sure you know why we're here." David finally straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. His gaze swept over the group, lingering on Ethan, whose discomfort was evident. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said simply. Ethan cleared his throat, stepping forward. He was not a man accustomed to admitting fault, but this time he had no choice. "David, he hesitated, then sighed. "I was wrong. I misjudged you. I let arrogance blind me, and I fired you without cause. I'm sorry." David studied him for a long moment. Then, without a trace of bitterness, he asked, "Tell me something, Ethan. If I were just an ordinary man, without the titles, the medals, the recognition, would you still be here?" Ethan had no answer. Silence settled over the small group as David's question hung in the air. Would they have come if he had been just an ordinary man? Ethan's lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. He knew the truth, they wouldn't have. They had dismissed him without hesitation, without consideration, simply because they believed he was unimportant. Now, with their reputations at stake, they stood on his doorstep, desperate to undo the damage. David sighed, looking past them to the sky, as if searching for something greater than the moment. Finally, he spoke. "I've spent my life serving people, not for praise or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And yet, time and time again, I've seen how quickly people dismiss others based on appearance, status, or assumptions." His gaze shifted back to Ethan. "You didn't just fire me, Ethan. You fired a man who gave his all to his work, who treated everyone, no matter their position, with respect. The real question is, have you learned anything from it?" Margaret, sensing the weight of David's words, stepped forward. "We can't change what happened," she admitted. "But we can do better moving forward. David, we want you back. With a promotion, better pay, and full recognition for who you are." David studied her, then glanced at Lisa Harper, who had been the first to uncover the truth. She looked at him with quiet respect, not because of his past, but because of the man he had always been. He gave a small, knowing smile. "I appreciate the offer, Margaret," he said. "But I don't need a promotion or higher pay to prove my worth. I already know who I am." He exhaled deeply, as if releasing the weight of their expectations. "And I won't be coming back." Ethan's head snapped up in surprise. "Wait, what?" David shook his head. "I worked that job because I believed in serving people, not corporations. But my time there is over. I have other places where I'm needed." Margaret opened her mouth to protest but stopped. She saw it in his eyes, his decision was final. David took a step forward, his voice calm yet firm. "You don't need me back in that building. What you need is to change the way you treat people, regardless of their titles. Because the true measure of a person is not in how they treat the powerful, but in how they treat the unseen." With that, David extended his hand. Ethan hesitated, then grasped it, the handshake carrying more weight than any contract ever could. As the team walked back to their cars, humbled and forever changed, David turned back to his garden, his heart at peace. He had never needed their validation. but they had needed his lesson.